So we have another special edition of the Data Exchange podcast. Our main guest is Assaf Araki of Intel Capital. And our host today will be our managing editor, Jenn Webb. So take it away, Jenn.
Thank you, Ben, and welcome, Assaf. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting me.
So we're going to be talking about metadata management in this podcast. And so to bring us up to speed and to sort of outline why it has become so important, can you walk us through the evolution of data management and how we got here and kind of where we are?
Yeah, so I think the evolution of data management go along with the evolution of data systems. So we start to see data analytics system, mostly in the industry in the 80s and then in the 90s. Those were mostly data warehouses or databases, and the usage was mostly BI. So it was a centric hub. You bring all the data in, and from there you run your analytics, and metadata systems were built on top of this system. So you have one place in the organization where you had data, and there based on that system, you build a metadata system. But along the time, and especially in the started with the explosion of big data, Hadoop, streaming systems, we've seen many types of systems within organization, data systems, and the complexity grew. And this complexity makes it harder to track the data and understand what data reside where. And that's when we've seen the evolution of metadata systems. In addition to the increasing variety of data system, we've seen as well an increase of usage of data in the organization. So it's not only more people, but it as well different roles. And not only developers, but also we see data analysts and business analysts and data scientists that take data and transform and create new data assets. So this, from one hand, a large variety of systems and a large variety of users created more hard to understand what we have in the organization regarding data systems, where the data resides, who use it. And for that, we need new metadata systems.
Okay. And you and Ben have been working on an article describing the architecture of such a system. Ben, for our listeners, that's published now, correct? Where can they find that?
Yes. So this article is out. I will link to it in the episode notes. And so I think...
And they can find it on gradientflow.com, right?
Gradientflow.com. But it will be in the episode notes to this particular podcast episode.
Okay.
And so I just want to add to what Assaf said. So my personal interest in metadata dates back to as far back as 2015. It's funny to say as far back as 2015, but it is 6 years ago. So at that time, I was chair of a conference called Strata. And there was a talk at Strata, New York in the fall by a professor from UC Berkeley, Joe Hellerstein, on metadata. And, I thought the abstract was interesting. I stopped by the talk, and I knew that at that time that it was going to be something that people should probably pay more attention to. So at that time, it was purely academic project. So I did something that I normally, I don't even know if I did it any other time, but I watched the video of his talk, and then I wrote a post. Just basically, here are the key points of what Joe talked about. You guys should, so people in the data space should probably pay attention to this. And funny enough, most of the ideas there probably started appearing in some of these metadata systems that these tech companies started producing probably in the order of 2 or 3 years later. So now we're talking from 2015. Some of these systems started appearing 2017, 2018, and yeah. So basically, as Assaf pointed out, in many ways, we're like a decade into this big data movement, big data revolution. But the basics seem like they've remained the same, right, Assaf? So basically, data volume has increased, if anything, because now you even have machine generated data. As Assaf said, when we started the Strata conference, it was, the focus was around data engineers and data scientists. Now you've got business people, analysts, really engaged with data. And if anything, the variety of data has even grown, because back then we were really, when we talked about unstructured data, we were talking mostly about text. Now you've got images, video, sound. And then finally, the notion of real time back then was quite specialized. So you have these specialized distributed stream processing systems like Storm. But now they seem to be much more commonplace. And the desire to consume data faster seems to have also increased. So people want faster answers, more up-to-date and faster answers. So yeah, so 2015, it's funny to think about it, but it seems like ages ago. And in the tech industry, that seems kind of a long time ago, but the systems have definitely improved. But as Assaf and I tried to do in our post, we tried to sketch out how metadata might influence the future of data technologies moving forward. But I think it's fair to say we're still in the early days.
Right. And so going back to the post, talking about the architecture, if we want to start with that, and then we can move into how it's going to affect technology going forward. But Assaf, do you want to start talking about the structure that you guys laid out, the building blocks, kind of unpack each one for us?
Yes. So in the essence, the metadata management systems, it's not different from a data warehouse systems. Data warehouse gather data from across the entire organization and then build a data model in order for user to retrieve insight to answer a question efficiently. So you can think of a metadata system as some specialized vertical data warehouse. Like we have a data warehouse for healthcare, or for finance, we have a data warehouse for metadata. And the unified schema is the first layer that's actually in charge of collecting the entire data about our data from different systems across the entire organization. They connect to database management system, microservices, code repositories, and they gather the entire data and they connect it. This layer collects also data in different modes. Some of it will be my pool, where the system goes out and bring data and update the database. And some of them will be pushed by the system that will push the data and do periodically updates and prepare it to build the next layer of the data catalog. So the bottom layer, the first layer is like a staging layer in the data warehouse where we bring all the data from all the sources to a bit of a transformation and prepare the data. And the second layer on top of it, we call it the data catalog. This is similar for a data warehouse, a data model, or data mart, where we actually want to build the data per our KPI in data warehouse. So here we want to prepare the data for the next layer in the structure that will be easy to retrieve and ask questions. So the data catalog, as we see it, in charge of preparing the data for different tasks. We identify main four, but it might be we have more tasks in the future. And some of it are like around description of the data. Some of it may be around the lineage Some of it can be around versioning control, collecting all the data of the versioning and understand what changes happen. And last but not least, it's all the data of the usage. We want to know who used which data when and what he did with it. So this is like not an it's not an active layer, but it's not preparing for the data for the next layer, which is the active layer. And the last layer on top of it, this is actually the governance layer. This is the third layer, and it's mostly active. It's take action based on the data. So it's combined the catalog itself with external data. And we see different solutions, like user want to classify data for this different sensitivity level, or they want to protect data by masking it or even encrypting it. They want to manage and enforce access based on external policies that you have. If you belong to that organization, you can access and see the data. If not, you will see mask data. That's one example. Or they need to follow regulation. And last but not least is improving the data quality by finding bugs in the data and maybe fix them or anomalies in the data. So it's important to clarify that we may see as well in this layer future additional building blocks that we in the governance layer or in the data catalog that we didn't think about or right now looks less important.
All right. Ben, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think that actually, so one of the things we try to emphasize in this post is metadata. Having a solid metadata management system gives you a strong foundation. So, but on the other hand, it is possible to build some of the solutions that Assaf described without a metadata management system. It is just going to be probably less comprehensive and not as global in scope. And also just having that strong substrate at the bottom of the stack that Assaf described just sets you up for success. And just basically you are set up so that as your data changes, all the downstream services change with any changes in your data. And so while you can actually build some of the services that Assaf described as standalone services, it's just going to be harder.
Right. Is this solution more based on the sheer volume of data that companies are having to deal with, or perhaps is it very helpful for dealing with unstructured data? What is the driving force behind changing to an architecture like this?
So I think that if you read the post, so actually, so a bit of history here. As I mentioned earlier, there were a bunch of tech companies that actually started building out something along these lines. Not exactly the way we laid out, but stylistically in the same way. So what they found is actually they had a lot of data services and a lot of users, and it was just hard to not build a solid metadata management system to address all those needs. There's just too many types of data, too many places where data is coming from, and too many people needing to use data. I don't know, Assaf, do you have any other angle here?
I think there are as well. The question is coming from, what the user need, I think, and what the customers want. And if we look from the customer perspective, they not want just to lay out how the data map within the organization is look like. That's nice, but the value is actually in the action that they want to take. Either understand cause and effect in changes or enforce access. And I think that's what drive actually the needs for the system. So what we've seen some companies start from spend point, which address a more small problem. But now we start to see some like companies that try to address this problem from its foundation up. And this is, I think, two forces that we'll see continue for a long time. And we don't have a clear answer who's the right one or who will eventually win.
And as Assaf put in context earlier, Jen, you can look back to data warehouses and how people use data warehouses, right? So before people had access, before you have a data warehouse in your company, you might run a report your way. I will run a report my way, and we just might come up with different numbers, right? So in many ways, having all these services systematically built from the ground up, the way Assaf described, really also provides the users with data they can trust and that they can agree upon.
Right. And one of the things that you stress in the article is the importance of global data governance. Is that what you were describing, kind of having where everyone's kind of running, like you're going to run this particular kind of report, so everybody runs it the same way? Is that what that means?
Yes.
Yeah. Assaf, you.
Yeah. So I think that's one part of it. Like we use the term a lot in data pipeline, and we use it because data is flowing like water. It's flowing across the organization, and you can think of a drop of water like one data element. In that case, it's flowed via a different system. It consumed by different user again and again. It resides in many storage, and we need to be able to understand what's happened to this drop, not only on one hub, on one lake, on one storage engine, but we want to have a global view of what happened to the data from its creation to its consumption, and this is the global sense of there are some solutions that focus on the big data lakes, like where most of the users are gathering and consuming the data, but that's not an end-to-end view of your data.
Okay. And so what kinds of companies benefit most from this kind of architecture?
All companies, Jen.
Okay. Is it mainly sort of targeted toward larger companies, or should all companies be sort of switching to this?
I think eventually, to the extent that companies will have the services that Assaf described earlier, anything from data discovery to data governance, and things like this, I think they will benefit, because basically many companies now are actually reliant on many different data streams, data sources, data types. But if I were to guess, Assaf, maybe some of the earlier industries that will move in this direction are the ones that maybe are more regulated, maybe like finance or healthcare. But eventually, I think they will. I think companies will find themselves in the same place as some of these tech companies. Now, the tech companies, you might say, Jen, are extreme in the amount of data they produce. But I don't know if that's the case now, given that more and more companies really use so many different systems. So, I mean, you can start a company, and within 6 months, I bet you're using 100 different software as a system service and different systems. So it's really hard to get your data under control, regardless of your company size. I don't know, Assaf, what do you think?
So sorry, go ahead, Assaf.
Yeah, I agree with Ben that eventually every company will use it. It might be different drive to use it first, as Ben mentioned, some company will start using it because of governance. Other will start using it in order to accelerate the pace of their data consumer, making sure they're accessing the right data, building product faster, data product faster, and by that improving the business. And so the reason to start and use those might be different in different company, but at the end, this is like, will be in the future like asking, who will use data warehouses? Everybody use data warehouses, and everybody that use data warehouses and data system eventually need the metadata system as well to lay out the map of the data in the organization, govern the data, and make it more accessible to the entire workforce.
Right. And Ben talked about larger companies having so many streams of data coming from so many different directions. What are companies doing now, and how big or how difficult or what kind of a challenge will it be to switch to this architecture?
So I think what companies doing now from metadata perspective, it's mainly focused in the places that are more vulnerable, like a data lake or a data warehouse or a reporting tool. So their main focus in trying to solve the governance problem is in a very local and specific failure point. They are not trying to do it all across the pipeline itself. Anything else to add, Ben?
No, actually, that's exactly what I was going to say is basically, so the vision that we lay out is that then you would have that capability across all your data sources, right? So instead of just, because right now, as Assaf described, there's actually companies who try to do this, but more in a much more localized way. And so what the tech companies that built out these metadata management systems discovered is that wasn't enough for their needs, because they wanted a more global solution, right? So.
And so where in the company does it make the most sense for this to sit? Are there enough crossovers with business intelligence that it would sit over with that group, or does it need to sit with IT, or who's in charge of this new architecture?
So the one that charged in the architecture itself is the same one that in charge of the other data system platform, but the users are might be a bit different than the BI. Some of it's similar to the BI users, because you can think, for example, that data analysts or data scientists want to understand where is my best churn data, and where it's coming from what operational system. Using the metadata system, we can understand it. But from the other hand, we might have legal people who want to validate that regulation, GDPR regulation, are enforced. So they will use the systems to create the roles that enforce it, and they might use reports as well to understand who used what and if there are any breaches in the system itself. So unlike the BI place, we see as well more operational applications or APIs on top of the metadata system.
And Ben mentioned earlier in the podcast the potential effects that this architecture could have on developing technologies and how technological advances move forward. One of the things that you've written about recently, Assaf, is the pressure that developers are facing to more rapidly deploy AI projects. Do you see any sort of role that this kind of architecture could play in helping move that forward a little faster?
Yeah, the data scientists spend most of their time not on the algorithm, but on the data itself. And the modeling part consumes small portion of their time. And a lot of the obstacles in the data science work is to find first the right data. understand what is origins of the data, in order to what is relevant to solve their problem, and what is the source, and understanding influence when the data created. So metadata system actually make the data in the organization transparent, and they can see the entire data of the organization. They can see who used what their colleagues are using to build their solutions, where this data came from, what is the assumptions in the system itself, and that make them more productive. It reduces the time that they're spending on searching and understanding the data. Yeah, they still need to work on it and prepare it for the algorithm and train models, but it removes one big roadblock that they have today.
Yeah, there's a great stat from Lyft. So apparently within Lyft, 30% of the time of data scientists and data analysts is spent on just finding and validating data. So, and as Assaf pointed out, actually these days, in many ways, the model that you have, the machine learning model, in many ways is kind of a commodity anyway. So it's the data that is the most valuable. So the system that we're trying to lay out will make data discovery and just reproducibility audits a lot easier.
And because of the transparency.
Yeah. So which means actually in the ML world, Assaf, this could translate to easy implications as far as debugging your model, right? So, yeah.
Assaf, did you want to comment on that? On what Ben was talking about with the machine learning and debugging model?
So once the data is transparent, you understand where the data came from, you understand all the lineage. When you train the models and you see and you test it and you see output on inference, you can go back and understand where it's coming from. So it's I see it as an extension of the data science transparency, starting from the creation of the data and training, inference, and then going back to understand those relations.
But there is one thing here, Jenn, that I don't think we addressed in the post, and I'll be curious to hear what Assaf has to say. So Assaf, there's a parallel set of tools in the ML ops world around data lineage, model catalog, model governance. But if you think about it, a model in many ways is also data, right? So here's the parameters of the model. Here's the neural network architecture. So I wonder if our metadata management system can also subsume some of that stuff, huh?
Yeah, you can. We haven't talked about it, but I think you can think of MLOps as a metadata system for ML.
Yeah.
And I think that's a bit more complex and have very unique requirements for the ML that are not necessarily unique for the general data metadata. And it's interesting to see in the future, will we see those systems blend? That's one option. But as both of the stacks are very early, and we see first evidence of open source solutions and companies, it's hard to predict what will happen in the future.
Right. And so talking about tools a little bit, what kinds of tools exist now, if any, and how do you see the tools and the solutions evolving?
So on the metadata management side, I think in our post, we listed out a bunch of open source projects that people can try of varying degrees of maturity and feature completeness. There are more tools, Assaf, probably in the upper portions of our stack, right? So in layer 2 and layer 3. But then now there are at least 2 startups building out from the metadata management systems that were open source two startups are building on top of those. So it'll be interesting to see uh, how those startups evolve.
And Assaf, what do
Yes,
you think about the evolution?
We publish till now. This is our fourth post. We publish a post on AI stack. We publish a post on BI stack. And as in any stack, I always ask myself if we will see at the end one tool that rules them all, the entire layer of the stacks, all the needs from the users of the developers, or we'll have different tools for different layers or different stages. And I think I must say that I don't have a clear answer right now, but I can share that we see two directions. First, customers prefer not to stitch too many products together, of course, but they want each product to be fulfill all their needs, and focus from product perspective is really important. For customer perspective, the value relies on the top layer. So at the end, a customer wants a governance, or he's want to making the data more transparent and accessible. And in order, from other hand, in order to make it global, one must invest in the middle and the bottom layer. So you really need to build first a good bottom layer, like a unified schema. When we look on the companies and solutions in the past, it appears that a lot of them are some open source, actually. So question, will it stay open source and maybe the top layer will be commercialized? Maybe. So those pressure from the bottom up from the global, and the top down from the governance and accessibility are two pressures. And a big question, who will win? Will eventually we'll see one tool for the data catalog and one tool for the governance? Will we see one that take over the others while the others become a commodity? It's a good question. If we take analogy for the data warehouse, we have ETLs, a data warehouse, and reporting, and those three layers exist for the last 30, 40 years. And no one product win all. So it might be the case that we'll see, like in the data analytics, one product for each layer. But we might see a winner that will go from a bottom up or from top down and take the entire stack.
I think our thesis, though, Jen, is that the bottom layer is going to be important regardless. So,
and when we talk about the bottom layer, it's the unified schema layer.
Yeah. And then people can build services on top of that. So then the people building the services on top might be different companies, as Assaf pointed out.
But the big question, like in the AI stack, if the deep learning library are all open source, they're really important, but still nobody makes money out of the open source itself, but from services and support on top.
All right. With that, thank you so much, Assaf, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say something quick, that I hope that we'll get feedback from our listeners and to the post and start a discussion and debate. That would be great.
Oh, for sure. You guys want to share on the podcast right now for the listeners your Twitter addresses?
Oh, yeah. So we have similar.
At Big Data.
We have similar. I'm at Big Data.
And I'm bigdata-ml.
Perfect. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much.